So, guys, as you know, my name is Luanna. I am a history graduated, and I research in gender and sexuality. This is the area that I study. And I'm here to talk briefly, so it will not be a very long talk, but just an introduction on sexuality in Brazil. And if we are going to talk about sexuality in America, like Latin America, etc., we need to talk about colonization. We need to talk about Christian morals and gender oppression, guilty, all this, because sexuality was created on those bases. Okay, because there was a whole thing going on here, and then we had all the colonizers' actions on it. So I'd like to start talking a little about the indigenous practices pre-colonizations and then how this was viewed from the Portuguese point of view. So, well, nowadays, the indigenous queer community is trying to, uh, let's say that they are trying to, I'm looking for this word, a good word to specify this, but to say that being indigenous and gay or a lesbian, it's nothing that came from acculturation. It's not something that came from the white culture. It's something that has been happening through all around the world before colonization and things like this. Because nowadays, what people say is that if you are indigenous and you are homosexual, you are not really indigenous. So they are fighting prejudice inside their own communities. And before colonization, we had in different groups in Brazil, for example, the Tupinambás or um, the Guarani groups, and even in the I had to take a note in here, Tupinais. They had different practices in here. Actually, I don't know if any of you ever heard of, in North America, there's something called the two spirits. There are people who recognize with both genders in one body. And these people existed throughout America, all over America. And in Brazil, we had in the Tupinambá communities, the people call it saco-e-benguiras, the girls or women who had male appearance and used the male costumes and all their actions and duties, and the tibiras, who were the men who dressed as women or had women practice or had relationships with other men. The first homophobic crime to happen in Brazil happened against a boy that we don't know the name. He was just known as Tibira. It happened in Maranhão. And this man, he was wrapped around a cannon and he was used as a cannonball. So he was exploded. To, that was his crime because the missions that were arriving to Brazil, all this missionary that were coming to Brazil, they had to erase this sin that was known. This was a new word for me in English because in Portuguese it's called nefando or a nefando sin. In English, it's a nefarious sin. That is basically the idea because the word homosexuality comes from the 19th century. So before that, we had this word that was when people had these practices. So this starts being persecuted inside Brazil. And this shows how hypocritical we are because Brazil, there was the practice such as bestiality or the initialization of young men with adults, older men. And this in Brazil would be just seen as something that you can give a couple of prayers, praise a little, go like have some penitences, and you are good to go. But if you were willingly, if you because you wanted to have establish a relationship with a person from the same sex, that would be persecuted. We didn't really have at least not a huge, we didn't have like inquisition in Brazil, not like not in the ways that we know in Europe. But in the book Trópico dos Pecados, it's mentioned that there are some files, there are some cases of people in Brazil who were persecuted for having relationships with the people from same sex. So this shows that we've been doing a witch hunt on them, something that was natural, was seen as normal pre-colonization. And so when Portuguese arrived here, they put all these morals, all this thing like the shame, the shame of like showing your body, or the relationships, the way that was saying, the way that people would have established relationships, marriages. And even Anchieta, he mentions that he didn't know any records. Of course, this is just one of his mentions. I can't talk for what happened in multiple tribes around Brazil, but that before the Portuguese arrived, there were no many tales or accounts of women who were killed by their partners because they were unfaithful. So this was not a common thing. The jealousy, this possessive thing, was not something that was and like in the roots of the relationships around here. So as time goes by and all this, we have the first encounters and all. We have the arrivals from people from Africa. We have the enslaved arriving here. And so how does the traditional family establishes around? It's usually we had a Portuguese man who had a white wife that was absurdly repressed. She wouldn't barely look at her own body. She would barely see all her parts. Sex was something completely a taboo for to talk between their spouses. The spouses wouldn't talk about this. So what were the common practice? Something that was overlooked. Oh, I will pretend this is not happening. It would be to have an indigenous or a Black woman as a mistress, sometimes even by force. So this was a common practice around there. And Brazil was known for many, many years as a place where the initialization, the sexual initialization was very, very young. People would say some travelers reported that some 12, 10, 11-year-old women already, actually girls, I can't call them women, already knew a lot about the arts of love. And this actually is, we think sometimes, oh, but a long time ago was normal. People got married at 13, at 12 years old. Actually, this is not that true for all over the world. Brazil, especially, we had a very, very young initialization because these women, they needed to eat. They needed to find a person to rely on. So the families who had many children, they had this desire of getting their girls to get married soon, so they could have space in their house, so they could provide. They knew there was someone providing for them, even as if they were not leave the house married. Sometimes they would leave the house as a mistress to be in another house, and the man was preferred. That was not like the most correct and Catholic thing to do, but it was a common practice in Brazil for a very long time. These amancebamentos were very, very common. And it was a practice that was related. And some Brazilians arrived in different countries and they would be like, they don't have an official mistress, they don't have anyone on the side or something. They would be like, they'd find it strange. And so coming back to the age thing, throughout Europe, especially in England and France, that is where we can find easier these records. People actually would get married in the 19th century or the 18th century after their 20s. So when we watch those movies and we think like, oh, 20, I'm too old to get married. Actually, no. On the 19th century, a Victorian woman would get married at 27. But then you think my grandmother, she got married at 18, but my great grandmother, she got married when she was 14, or another one when she was 13. So in Brazil, there was a very young sexualization of women. And this explains why nowadays we have such a, sorry, this will be the awkward part. We have such a fetish for the waxing. This is one of the things that can be explained by this fetish that we have for young women. So all around the world, girls, is the English teachers, how do you call that kind of waxing where you don't have nothing, no hair at all? A Brazilian. They call it a Brazilian waxing because you remove all the hair. So all this thing it's like a copy of a very young body. So there is this whole thing, this love, this sexual attraction and desire for people with delicate features that remind of a child, actually. And this is very strong around here. I'm not saying that all the girls, oh no, I will let my hair grow just because of against that. No, but I'm explaining one of the reasons why. And this is very recent because think about Greek statues, not Greek, let's think of Renaissance or all the paintings, those ladies, they didn't have any hair because until a couple of centuries, actually a couple of decades ago, it was attractive to have hair was something that showed you were a woman, you're a full-grown woman. So the nuns, actually the priests and the nuns, they used to wax everything. They didn't have any hair because the hair was sinful, and being this image of like no hair at all, it was something like saint. That's why the paintings and the sculptures, they don't have any hair on it. And so, with all of these things, as I said, coming back to this part where I said that Brazil is very hypocritical when it comes to sex, it's because, as I said, the colonizers raised all this identity from the indigenous people in their ways to practice different kinds that were not the uh, hetero, the normal of I am a man, I'm a woman, and like there were things in between of this. There were the people who were acted like two spirits or were a man but had female characteristics and vice versa. But Brazil nowadays, we still suppress this. We still fight against this thing that is not put it inside the box. We're the number one country killing trans people, or the other kinds of, we are number one in killing them, and we are the number one consuming trans pornography. So at the same time that we are excluding and putting hate into something, we also have a desire for it. So at the same time that virginity is something that it's praised, that we want, it's a taboo. Nowadays not that much, but it used to be a taboo for the 80s ladies and all. It is something that we crave for. We want our daughters or sisters or wives before marriage to be virgins, but we want virgin peoples. We look for them, we crave them for them. So there's this whole thing going on that is completely paradoxal. That is this desire that we're dealing with. And well, so let me see if I can establish a line here, because sometimes I just start talking and then I lose a little bit of where I should be going. Anyway, but okay. So getting back to this thing that we crave for something, at the same time we suppress something. The people, as you maybe remember that I've mentioned, that the Inquisition in Brazil, the missions in Brazil who persecuted the sexual practice that were not traditional, they usually would go on the poor people or the young and the ones who didn't have any power. So we have records of enslaved women and men who were abused by their masters, their owners. And these people ended up being punished instead of the owners. Sometimes they would go to the church and ask for help and say they were being abused, but the fault would end up on them and not on the ones who had the power or had the fault on it. And so these things, it keeps it's a cycle. We seeing the same things that were happening back then happening again right now. And as I was saying about back here to the gender roles, we have to get married. There is a saying in Brazil that a white woman to get married, a brown woman to have sex with, and a black woman to be beaten, for example. So this is a very old saying that kept being seen as a truth as people were. So that's why today we talk about the black woman loneliness, because actually I would say I was going to say in the 19th to the 19th, early 20th, but this is not true. This continues. It's the idea of like the woman, the private woman. What is the private woman? It's the woman that you want, that the men want on their sides, on their families as their wives. It's the quiet, the beautiful, delicate features, the perfect slogan from the how was that saying from Temer, from the Temer's wife? How was that saying? Remember that?
Bela, recatada e do lar.
Exactly that one. So they went this stereotype. There was the little feet fashion in the early 20th century that were where women would be suitable for marriage if they had very small feet, because that showed they didn't work on the fields, they didn't have to be around walking and all, and the skin had to be very light to show that they didn't had to work all day in the sun or in the fields. So all this continues happening in like unconsciously or not. Exactly. And so these women, the wife material, they had to be preserved. So they were seen as the ones who were supposed to know nothing about sex. They should be kept in the dark. They would inform themselves through magazines. And the magazines, Jesus Christ, if you've ever taken a look, if one day, if you get to a hemeroteca and take a look at Kitty, the Claudia, and all those magazines from the 50s, you'd be surprised from it. And what you see there, what you find in those magazines, is that you have to pretend and accept. A good wife accepts and forgives. And so these women were kept in the dark about pleasure, about could they do to themselves, and how the man could please them. And in a relationship, they had to be forgiven. There were I don't know even how many tales I've read on those magazines that said that the woman who looks for divorce, she's doomed to end up alone and miserable, because a real woman, she forgives her man. And like this, it's what brings joy to a woman. And actually, I'm not talking just about the 50s magazines. Think of Claudia in the 90s. I know my mom had a pile of those magazines and I've read them. I remember titles like, "Oh, he cheated on me. What should I do now?" And then you've had lots of things talking about this. And the women who knew about sex, the women who dared to do this, because enslaved women or freed women too, or even the poor women who dared to use their body, use their sexuality to obtain some advantage compared to others in their same position, was seen as the lowest point a woman could reach. So for a long time, the women who embrace their sexuality, be it as a professional worker, such as a prostitute or not, they are seen as a source of dangers, a source of disease. There was a whole thing. They were seen as the end of the structure that held up the marriage, or held up society together. Because so the whole structure can work, so the whole family idea could work on the principles that we were educated to have, it's necessary that there's a powerful figure, and one that is there obeying. This was the wife that could not know about their body. And there was this woman from the outside that could never be in a family. She could never be in the same position. She could not be seen in the same way. That was the one who knew about sex, who knew about pleasure. These were, and these stories repeats through centuries. So we have powerful figures such as Madame de Pompadour in France. And we have, oh my God, my memory is so bad. Oh, the woman who was Mistress for Dom Pedro the First, the Dom Pedro First. I forgot her name right now.
Marquesa de
Please,
Santos?
Marquesa de Santos, please. Yes, thank you. So these women, or any other women who dared to change, to try to get power through their expression of sex, were, they had some, they couldn't actually rejoice on their reward, on the status they had. They had to resign to be judged by more than all. Just like that song from Marília Mendonça, Mistress doesn't have a home, there it had to be their position and there. And so the thing is, I am very bad at explaining things when I see a lot of people staring at me, so I get lost on the topics. I had so much more to explain. So I actually prefer if you ask me some questions. Otherwise, I will get a little lost and like trying to find actual line to go to follow. So that was it for now. And I would like to hear from you actually. Okay. Thank you.
So
Thank you.
my first question is, why did you decide to research this topic? How did it happen?
How did I decide? I 5 years ago, I was in a bookstore and I saw a book named Histórias Íntimas by Mari Del Priori. And I thought, okay, let me see how that goes. And then that led to this book, and then led to another book, and to other book, and to like this book, for example. This, by the way, it's one of the best books about sexuality in Brazil. It's called Devassos no Paraíso. It's by João Silvério Trevisan. It's really good research, really, really fantastic. And then I read Trópico dos Pecados and History of Virginity. And I don't know, it fascinated me. At first time I started reading a little about this, and then I found the Hemeroteca. It's fantastic. It's like an archive online where you can find magazines and papers from, since I believe since the 19th century there. And then that fascinated me. It was something that I was always curious about. And we talk very little about this in academy, in the academy. We talk, girls usually, we read magazines, we talk to each other, but sometimes we see those people who talk about sex on TV, but it's not the same thing. So I wanted to know a little more about it. Any other question?
Yes, from me, another one. I'm curious because you mentioned that indigenous people, they had these, like, I didn't understand, it's two spirits, fluidity.
Yes, two spirits. So two spirits, there are registers of two spirit people all over North America, and even some parts of Central America. What is a two-spirit person. Some groups, depending on what indigenous group, they didn't recognize just two sex. There was not just male and female, there was the two-spirit. It could be a person who had female features but a male spirit. It could be a woman with a male spirit, and it could be something else. It could be another expression. And these groups, they took this very seriously. So if I am a true spirit, I have specific religious duties, I have specific chores to design. And if I am a woman, like a biological woman, but I have a male spirit, I would cut my hair, just like the Sacoimbeguiras would do the same in the Tupinambás groups in Brazil. I would cut my hair, I would go to war, I would fight, I would learn how to do anything a man would do. And if I am a man who have a female spirit, actually there are very interesting accounts of these women who would even give birth, actually, but they would simulate the whole situation. They would be pregnant, they would have a pregnancy, a psychological pregnancy, and then they would go to the woods and they would have like one of those rejected babies. There was a agreement between them. They would cut their thighs, so they would be blood. They would cut themselves, and also to simulate the whole labor situation, and to have a baby. So there were their mother. So they were their mothers from the baby that they had in the woods during the period of time when women were bleeding, when they were on their period. These men would, not this men, sorry, this two-spirit woman, they would even cut themselves so they could bleed just like the other women. So they were women, fully women inserted in that society. Same thing.
So the spirit would be what determines how they identify themselves. Okay.
Exactly. That would determine this part. What else?
I'm intrigued by this. You brought it up. Now I have to ask. So, if it's interesting because you said this, these two spirits, they would decide by the gender, or they would find out, would there be a ritual where they would be directed to it? And another, it's a two-part question. I'm too curious and I have to deliver it. So, and the other part of the question is why there would be chores and assignments specific for men if they were two-spirited, if they didn't have a gender, and how would they say, oh, if you were a man, you have to hunt. So how did these, we started, since we are talking about gender and sexuality?
Okay. So some groups had rituals, some groups didn't. So there were, it's been a while since I've last studied this, so I can give you the details, but there were some groups, especially near Canada. I will not remember their names, but they were the group that went through all that part. I mean, also from Canada to some part of the United States, where when they reached a certain age, they would go inside a circle, and there were like some objects that were associated to male or female, and the object that survived the fire while they were there was the one that defined what gender they would perform. So there were some, but I can say that this repeated itself all over America. I don't know about this ritual happening in Brazil, for example. The Tupinambás and Tupinambás, there was no such a thing. There was a thing like, oh, I don't want to I don't see myself as performing the female characters, the female chores. I want to perform the male chores. So that wasn't okay then. So cut your hair, do what you have to do, get a wife, and go on with your life. They would get married and all. It was a pretty normal costume to do. And about the church, if they were two spirits, why did they have to choose? Because, well, this depends a lot. One, there is a very famous case of a two-spirit leader that it was a male body, but female characteristics on the garments, the dressing, all this part. It would perform as female, but they would lead into war because of their strength from the male body. So as I said, this changed from group to group. So there, in general, their biological vision of sex was not as important as the one that came from their mind, from the spirit. So they would perform the activities that were designed to the gender they received in their heads. That was the idea that they received in the spiritual world, or they received as they perceived themselves, like that, depending on each group. Nowadays, some indigenous queer people, they don't like the word two spirits because they feel that when you call someone who identifies as trans or all this as a two spirit, you are removing the sociological part. You are seeing just the religious and spiritual side. You are not seeing the person who exists, who chooses consciously to perform like this, or who has always felt like that. So there is a discussion about this, maybe even back then. So there are many questions about this to be answered. Okay, guys, questions.
I,
Okay,
To you,
Rodrigo and Monica.
Rodrigo.
no, okay, Monica, please.
I was thinking about, I don't know the word exactly, monogamist. Is this
Monogamy.
right? Yeah,
Okay.
monogamy, yes. In the Americas, as you were telling us this story. I don't know if you have something else to tell us about the monogamy.
Monogamy.
Yes.
Yes. No problem. Well, monogamy was not exactly that serious around here. Marriage was seen as something that was contract, as today's marriage is a contract, but it was supposed to form alliances, to form bonds between different groups, and it was used to help during war or crisis, and to help with food security in all this part. But so unless you were a very important person in hierarchy around there, it wouldn't be that necessary to be monogamous or to be faithful to someone. This idea of being faithful is something very from the Catholic, from this European view. And even if you were a chief's wife or a daughter, not necessarily you would just have sexual intercourse with one person, with your husband. This was not exactly a rule. I know that in North America, it was very common sometimes when, for example, I have four sisters actually. And let's say that I get married first. And my husband is great. I love him. You should try, get married to him too. So the sisters would marry the same man sometimes. And this was something common in some places. And I know that in Brazil, sisters not necessarily married, but they would have relations with the same man. They had all this thing between, like, oh, he's nice, go there and try. So there was this thing of experimenting pleasure. And there was something very interesting about that. There is nothing to do with your question, but I just remembered that the colonizers said that the indigenous women were they were always like they always had the urges for sex. The same thing they tell about Black women. The same thing that they have this sex drive that was uncommon, unusual for them, and that the men didn't. The indigenous men, they didn't. So they took advantage that the women didn't actually have a monogamic relation as rule, and they used this to validate rape, to validate abuse, because they said that, oh, these men are not dando conta, they are not being enough, so we are here to fulfill this part, you know. So there was also this thing. They came also as this discourse that the monogamy came to civilize them. So they would marry an indigenous woman and like, but you are my wife, you won't have sex with anyone else. And then it started a series of records of assassinations and men of this Portuguese men who were jealous of their wives' sexual behavior and would kill them. So monogamy, I'm engaged, so I can say I'm not monogamic. But I'd say that when it came here, it came with a lot of loss along. Okay. So far, Rodrigo, please.
Okay, I have two questions. I have heard about two spirits, and with all you said, it seems to me that this culture is more close to what we used to call transgender.
Yes.
But I would like to hear from you. I don't know if there is some concept about it in the indigenous culture, but about homosexuality, how they see the practice, if it's kind of banished as we have here, or no, they practice and that's okay.
I know that in Brazil, Guarani didn't really see with good eyes the homosexual practice even before the colonization, but not because it was a sin, not because it was morally bad. It was just between men, among men. If men had sexual intercourse with other men, that would be like, it would be and not the two all men, the man who was, let's say, the active, let's put it this way, he would be seen as strong, as a good warrior. But the man who would be the bottom, the one who would be sodomized, let's put it this way, he would be seen as fragile, as feminized. So these men were not well seen among the Guarani people. But for some other groups, like the ones that were called as Cudinas, Tupinambás, as I've mentioned many times, and the Tupinaes, they were seen as normal. It's okay, it was fine. So there are many accounts, especially from Gabriel de Souza, if I'm not mistaken, backing from 1568. So it was like some of the first details telling that it was very common. It was a normal practice that would perpetuate in several groups, indigenous groups in Brazil. About the two spirits, in Brazil, we didn't have this name. As I said, you have Chibiras and Sacoimbeguiras. And yes, they are the closest idea of trans people, is very close to the definition that we have nowadays. But you can't call these people trans exactly because it's our modern term for it. So the term they used, it's attached to their culture, to their religion, to their practices, but it's very similar to what a transgender person is nowadays.
Okay, and I heard from if I remember, if I'm not making mistakes, but I guess it's I heard it from a historian. Uh, he I just want to know the concept, if it's right or wrong.
Okay.
But I heard it when we come to the context of the Bible, uh, homosexuality, it's used to be it used to be banished by the Jewish people, because, as this group said, because to maintain Jewish
Natality.
Jewish Jewish Jew, Jewish
Oh,
Jewish people Jewish
Mhm.
Jewish people in power. So used to be banished because they really need to procreate, because
Mhm.
it's a manner to keep the people in power,
Mhm.
to raise numbers and raise
To
numbers.
increase the numbers, yeah, to keep the
Yes,
numbers going
uh,
up.
I heard about it. I'd like to know if there is any sense.
Yeah, I am not exactly a specialist on the Bible. I mean, I've never actually taken enough time to research about this. I know a little about the Christian religions as a whole, but not deeply. I've never seen deeply into it. But yes, it does make sense, the idea of uh, forbidding this kinds of relationships to keep natality high, these numbers. But for example, I believe that what I've seen once in this book here, History of Virginity, they mentioned that among Jews, there was nothing actually that forbade the homosexual practices, but it was just like among Greek and Romans, that you can have lovers, you can have lover men, but you can't marry one, because this exactly because of the whole natality rates, and actually because of the unions, the power that would do to have women had to have a value in society, and their value became at some point the virginity and the marriage and all. And it's a very funny thing to think. Virginity is a whole other topic that I will not start now. Otherwise, we will start to just uh, go on. So, but I'm sorry, I can't really answer your question. But I believe it makes sense. Everything that it does make
Thank
sense. It has
you.
some. Thank you. And Fabio, Eliane, I don't know. Anyone close? Do you have any questions? Anything that you would like to know? No?
I
Yeah.
I have another question. After you,
Okay.
Fabio. Sorry.
no, ladies first.
You first.
Um, Congratulations, Luana. It's really powerful your speech, and I think that you are bring us with some sad situation about our culture, about our social historical, and it's I think that's very important to know this, because we need to fight against this situation, this violence. And I want to know if you studied something about specifically Black women, violence against Black women on the colonization, on the Brazil Empire. If you, I want you to say something about it. Thanks a lot.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for your question. Um, specifically about Black women. I've read some chapters. I've never been fortunate enough to find a good book about it. There are some chapters on New History of Women in Brazil or History of Women in Brazil from Contexto, the publisher. But what we know about it is that first, enslaved women, they were stripped from their sexual practice, their sexual view first, their actually their liberty, their freedom, because some of them were brought to Brazil to reproduce. This was not a very common practice here, it was more common in the United States, but some of them were brought to Brazil with this function, this idea. They would have babies to the person they would marry, they would have sexual relations to the person who they were assigned to. So they would have this freedom of choice. And the ones who would have the Black women who were beautiful, who had some interesting features, the features to be considered attractive, they had a double curse, let's put it this way, because one, they would be probably abused by the owners of the farms, the camps and all, and they would be abused sometimes even sexually by their wives. So because there are records of some owners' wives, those landlords' wives who would have maintained abusive relationships with enslaved women. So we know about this part, but we also know that they weren't just victims. They had active parts on owning their bodies and owning their destinies and doing something to it. So for example, some of them, especially there are some accounts in Pernambuco and Recife, Alagoas, they produce lots of sugar canes around there. So there were many girls. Is it engine? Just engine as well? Because I am not sure, because engine, I think of a car. Is it the same name? I'm not sure either.
For
engenho de açúcar.
So.
Yes, the sugar cane one.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
So Fabi saying yes. Yeah.
So
I look for this word. Sorry. That's because I look for this word and this idea one of those days, and it was like the meal, like you have for
the meal,
that water
exactly.
something. Yes.
Yes. There's the meal. Yes, true. So in this place, they would take this position. Okay, so this man, he wants my body. He wants me to do these things for him. I will not do it quietly. So they would demand things. Okay, I'll go to Bellevue, but I want my son with me. I want to have a house in here. I want to have decent meals. So these people also, these women, even in terrible situations, they were not just being passive about it. Some of them fought back. Some of them assassinated those men. Some of them poisoned them. So, of course, you will have accounts of all kinds, because sometimes we just look about Black history as if we were just there waiting to be saved and for something to happen, but they were doing things. They were fighting back. So I know that some Black women, they had this double agent thing. They would have an affair with the owner of the mills, but at the same time, they would have their husbands, they would have a family. And to deal with this, to try to balance this in the way they could, because anyway, as you said, your body, sexuality is power. So these women who knew how I could do this, of course, some of them could not fight back. There were some men who would be much more cruel to them, but there was this way to see it as well. There was also and then there was, after the colonization, after this part, after the after abolition. Then we have the free Black women. And then we get into the part of the loneliness and their not being chosen as wives, as being chosen as the ones to be on a side house, to be as in not in the spotlight, not as the first choice. But this is not for all women. Some of these women, they would become the mistress. Some of them would become wives. Some of them would be single, just like Carolina Maria de Jesus. In her book, she never got married because she had multiple children. She had multiple lovers, and she said, I prefer to be single. Are you crazy? I'm going to be beaten up like this man. She talks about her neighbors and how they are like abused by their husbands. So then they would actually have, it's not real, but they would get the perk of being not seen as the ideal woman, to express themselves sexually, socially, to have like, I will have my house, I'll be a single woman, because okay, I will not get married to one of those bureaucrats, one of those men, but I will be free in my way. They would have their choice, the freedom to choose how to raise their children, who they would date, what time they would get home, and like to work, and would then not have to give their money to their husbands, or not have to, don't need the permission of their husbands to open a bank account, because all of this was controlled by your father, or by your husband or your brother. I believe until 1968, when we had the Statute of the Married Woman. So, I mean, there were some perks on being like, on taking over the power of your body. But of course, we know that they are number one on rape rates and being sexualized very, very early. All this situation is unfortunately affects much more Black women. Once I was in a lecture in my mom's school. My mom is a teacher too, and there was this girl. I was talking a little about this, and a girl, I believe she was 12, and she was a Black girl, and she said, oh, I've read that there is a difference between white and Black feminism, and I've seen also that our bodies developed faster. So that's why men like us better and they want us better. And because Black women, they grow more, or body develops more. So is that why we have all these cases of being abused more than white women? So it was very internalized that it is these women, these children's fault that they are seen as a prey, actually, because their body is different. Their color makes them more like to lure women to them. So there are these two sides of it. Yes.
I think it's every time I hear these stories and people talking about these topics, it feels like so far away. It was in the past, but it wasn't. This is very recent history, but we have this illusion that it was so long ago, and this is so far from our reality, and it's not, right? It's still very much part of our society nowadays. It's just maybe a little different, maybe in a little more discreet, so it's not in our face, but it's still here.
Yes, it's pretty much still here. Even the thing that I've told you, that we used to get married very, very soon, like especially in the people who didn't have much money, they used to get married way earlier than the ones from the middle or upper classes. Nowadays in Brazil, just look look at the statistics that talk about firstborns, when the age that when they first have a child. Take a look at this data among white people, among upper class white people, among Black people, among lower income Black people, and see the huge gap that we have. Like the sexual initialization is such a strange word to say, but it's kind of like this. It starts usually between Black boys and girls around their 13 to 15 to 14 years old, and among white teenagers you would have 15 to 17. It doesn't seem like much, but it's a lot of different. This time when you are 12 or when you are 13 to when you are 16, there's a huge difference on like our whole understanding. I have a 13-year-old girl in my house. She's on fire right now, and I'm trying to explain to her why it's not time for her to do that. And I know that when she turns 15 or 16, her head will be completely different. So they're still kids, and the kids are still being overstimulated towards sex to have. And it's a very difficult thing to change right now, and it can always change, but it's probably into a future.
And I think the solution is to talk about it. The more we talk about it, the more aware we are.
Exactly.
Then we can do something about it, right?
Yes, and we don't, and we are such a strange people because Brazilians love talking about sex. We love having sex. We are known for all the sex things, but we don't talk about this in our families, in like with our friends, with our parents, with our relatives. And just so you know how strange we are, do you know what was #1 topic of search on X videos after the elections from 2018? Bolsonaro was #1 search on
Why?
X, and also Frota. Frota and Bolsonaro together was also on the top searches.
Nightmares.
Because we are actually crazy about we recreate this icon.
Look at Fabio. We lost Fabio.
I swear, I cracked just like I was like, you're kidding me. I remember I took a print and I put it in the group of friends, and I was like, Jesus Christ, what is going on? So, but ask to any homem de bem if they would admit they searched for Bolsonaro on X videos. Forever. But they were there. So this is our society. Well, thank you, Fabio. Sorry you have to go. Bye.
I'm so sorry. It was a big pleasure. Congratulations.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Well,
people search for Bolsonaro in next video.
Yes, after the day after the
I was
election,
going to ask
he was elected. He was elected. The next day, he was on top search.
To me.
What is expecting? They want to see Bolsonaro in a porn video?
Yes.
Is that so?
Yes.
Bolsonaro and Frota together.
Bolsonaro and Frota. They were
Frota can't imagine why.
Yes. Because we have this thing. We have an idol, and we have something that we idealize, and then we want to have this in our sex lives, actually. And after he, I sing this word this week, but I completely forgot. After he took the office, when he started running the country, the day after, who was there? Michelle. Because they have what they wanted, the president's wife too, not just the president. So yes, do I have I searched this on yes, I have because I was
Girl,
curious.
how do you find these kind of things? And how the hell did you have the idea to search for, the most searched videos on X videos? Now you have to tell us.
No, actually, well, just like everyone, I know it's not the best industry in the world, but we consume porn. And I remember there was the day after the election, I opened X videos, and there was it on top of the searches. I didn't have to go on find the search. It's like top searches of X videos in Brazil. If you open it, we'll show you there. So there was it. There was Bolsonaro, and I remember this. So after he got into the office, I opened on purpose. This time was to open and see, are they looking for Michelle? Because I'm sure they are looking for Michelle because they were talking about, oh, this first lady is beautiful. Now we have a real first lady. And there it was, one more time.
I'm Googling now.
That is unbelievable, but is not that is hard to believe because as I've said, we are the #1 country killing trans people, and we are the #1 country looking for trans pornography. So sometimes people are like, I am a straight man. I just have sex with my wife, and I'm a Catholic, I'm a Christian. And then oh, this man is everything I ever wanted to be. So I'm going to look for porn with him involved. Or even and Bolsonaro has admitted that when he was a teenager, he used to sometimes go after the chicken, go after the little goat to, and this actually, it's something that we say, Jesus, that is horrible. It was common 300 years ago. It was seen as, it's not as bad as having sex with another man. You see, you could actually get rid of this if you just pray the 20, how do you say Ave Maria? Holy, I don't know,
Holy Marys.
Holy Marys, yes, you pray 20 Holy Marys. I've been a teacher for years, but I still find it weird when something is translated just like the same.
I think it's Hail Mary, maybe.
Hail Mary.
Yeah.
So you pray 20 Hail Marys, and then you're good to go. You can have sex with the goat again. So.
Oh, this is sick. So maybe that's why I saw, 3 weeks ago, I saw on TV an ad against zoophilia. I don't know how to say that in English. So there was this zoophilia, maybe, I don't know. Mm-hmm. So there was this ad, actually a campaign with famous people from Globo. They saying, talking about yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, haven't you seen that, Sibeli? Yes, it was on Global, girl.
No, can you imagine how the situation is that they felt the need to make an ad telling people not to do it?
I know. I think that's because of Bolsonaro. I guess it's because when he said that, I don't follow him. I know about him from
a while ago.
It was before. Okay.
Yes, but unfortunately, it is actually people in the rural area, the countryside, they say that it's actually pretty common. So, and actually, I don't have to go that far. A couple of months ago, a dog was released in Palhoça because it was being abused by the owner. So,
I saw that.
Yes. So you see, it is that kind of thing that we find it disgusting and say it's nasty and oh God, and we know somebody who has done this. We know. I once 2 years ago, I did a camp. I started a research, and it was just like a checklist. I asked my mom first. The first question was, it was just for women. Have you ever suffered sexual violence? It was not sexual abuse. I asked about sexual violence. Have you ever been to any situation where you experienced sexual violence? And then she was like, no. And then I opened a 38 items question. I was like, okay, number 1, has anyone ever flushed to you, show their genitals for you, your consent? Yes. So has anyone ever touched your body without your consent? Yes. Has anyone so there are lists. we all know a man or a woman or a man who has practiced sexual violence, and we kind of overlook at it. And we know, and even women who do something like this,
Don't
that is,
consider as a violence.
it's not considered as a violence. Even rape, if even rape, sometimes we can just like, oh, no, he would never do that. He would never do such a thing. I know him. So I know because I have done this. One of my best friends, when I was 16 years old, she was abused by one of my ex-boyfriends, and then I thought, oh, he would never do that. He would never do this. So we are taught to trust the word of the people we know best. Like, oh, he's a nice person to me. How could he have done this? Just monsters rape. And we know it's not like that.
Do you think that all this bizarre sexual behavior, like with dogs and cows and whatever, it's a result of not talking about it, of not talking about sexuality in general?
Yes, I believe so. And like in many ways, people are very literal sometimes. So see the examples of the very, very religious girls who have anal sex because they think if they have vaginal sex, they wouldn't be virgins anymore. So, oh, I can have anal sex. It's not sex. It doesn't count. I will still be pure. So some people do that to animals to consider that is not the same. I will still be okay to do it. And yeah, sometimes of or repression, or sometimes even, I believe, unfortunately, homosexual guys who can't express themselves because they are very afraid of how they're going to be taken, and they think, okay, maybe this is not the same. And the young boys who are taught to be male, but okay, I will hold myself, I won't attack a woman, and believe that cow is not a problem. So because men are taught to be, they are taught to be fierce, they are taught to be aggressive and to go after what they want sexually. And
this is gross.
that's
Well, we
the
have,
thing. There is, so we have actually, yeah, I know I have to go.
No. I was going to say that we have a veterinarian here, and I was going to ask Rodrigo, have you ever had a case of zoophilia in your office?
Yes, I have a friend that she used to work in pathology, and sometimes she makes a post-mortem exam, and she saw some vestígios. I don't know.
Traces, yeah.
Traces, some traces of some raped pet, and sometimes we use, not me because I don't work with general clinic anymore, but some friends of mine, they used to tell me that about their suspicions of a raped pet, and it's like the behavior, the pet behavior changes. They especially females, cats or dogs, they used to be more not aggressive, but when I'm in fear, more
scared.
More care, yeah.
Scared.
Scare, yes. Oh my God, how could I forget this?
It happens. I forgot half of the words I wanted to say today because I was nervous.
They used to be a little more scared, or when we touch the vaginal area, they used to fear something, and we know that something happened. Huh? What?
Cringe.
Yes, yes. And we know that something happened to that pet. So we have some traces, we can identify some traces in when comes to mind any suspicious of raped pet. And it's tragic. Of course, it's terrible when it happens to people, and it's terrible when it happens to pets. For me, they are humans or animals. People who practice this, for me, no, I guess for the psychology, they are totally sick.
Yeah, we cannot even call these people animals because we are animals, right? So
Yeah.
it's something completely different.
Yeah.
I guess people are getting tired and leaving.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of time. Yeah, sorry guys. I've been here for 1 hour and like 20 minutes or something. So thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you for the chat. Thank you for the questions. And
thank you, Luanna. And you also have a YouTube channel, right? If you
yeah, I do. If
you're
curious about True Spirits, there is a video specifically about sexuality in North America where I explain a little bit more about this. And there is
please
also
send the link, please, in the chat.
1 sec.
I'm definitely going to watch this later.
Lais is fascinated.
It intrigues me. It intrigues me.
Wait.
Yeah, and what is most curious for me is that, I mean, why there is, for these people, they are so, different from the social pattern that we have. So why they would have a female chore and a male chore, this is what intrigues me the most. So this
why would they have? Well, because it's very common since the ancient times. We have these, not since Asian, but like in many societies, we have this separation of labor related to gender. This gender separation of labor, like women always worked. We've always worked in many different ways. And there were things that were considered easier for women to do, such as the ones that required patience, require focus and all, and the ones of force and aggressiveness and like all these things were like left for the men to do it. And not necessarily on the field area. Field, like when it came to care for the crops, the harvest and all, men and women would work together. But the war part was left for the men because there was this thing of the natality control, this birth control part, that women, sometimes they were pregnant, so they had to take care of their bodies. They would have to take care of their offspring. I love this word. their children. So they had to care for the babies and all. So these were some of the reasons why they wouldn't go to war. So women who accept male features, they wouldn't have to care for the babies. So they can go to war. They wouldn't, usually they wouldn't get pregnant, these women with the male spirit. So they would go to war. They would do all these actions because they wouldn't have the same things to do that the other women would have. That is one of the possibilities. But I have so many questions. I have just as many questions as you do. Something about being a historian is that you have to just like accept that you will never know everything you want. Never, ever. It doesn't matter how much you read. It doesn't matter how much you study. And this is frustrating and gives me anxiety. But I would just die with lots of questions that I don't know why this, that. And so it is exhausting. It is frustrating too. For example, until nowadays, I've read some books about gender. I can say quite a. I don't know exactly why did we develop so many patriarchal societies. I don't know. I honestly, I don't have a good answer for this. I know I have some answers, but not a concrete answer on why are all major societies like patriarch.
Well, I guess it has something to do with Christianism, no? Maybe because.
But even before that,
even before,
like,
yeah.
Yeah, like
religion's
Egypt.
olden. Yeah.
When we have Hapset, for example, she was pharaoh. Pharaoh is a male title, so it was like a pharaoh or something like this. She was translated. She had to use a beard. She had to do the whole thing to be seen as a first. She had to personificate the male figure to be a ruler. So why isn't femininity associated to power? Why do we just have like some legends? We have like the Amazons, we have the Spartan ladies, the Spartan women. They were different. They were raised as warriors. That was one of the exceptions around there. We have some women around different places that had these warrior parts, but they had to give up the personification, this, I forgot the word, even in Portuguese, there is this performance of femininity that people say that you must display. You couldn't be this and a warrior at the same time. Why? This is something that I still don't have a good answer for it. So I just have to keep reading.
That's intriguing. I had never thought about it. You know, Christianism was the answer for me for everything. Now, I'm totally lost.
It's not just that. We have it's, for example, in Japan, there is a thing about geishas and about the wives. The wives had to be all just like in the Christian society, very like, oh yes sir, yes, and then they didn't know how to read. They couldn't learn how to read. It was kind of like they had to be obedient. They couldn't know about art. They couldn't talk in the presence of other men in some periods of time. But the geishas, no. And the geishas are painted as what? As prostitutes, but they were not. They were artists. They would sell sex sometimes, but in some specific areas, they would sell their virginity. There was a whole ritual there. But for the Western society, these women, the geishas, they were prostitutes. They were like when there was World War I and World War II, especially when they occupied Japan and all, there were lots of women who would dress as a geisha. That's when there was this popularization that geishas as prostitutes, but they were not. They were women who would take their art, their bodies, their
craft,
the whole performance that you want, the craft, the whole performance of femininity that they were expected to have, and would use this in their favor. They had a whole neighborhood. Some of them, they built a whole neighborhoods of. They were wealthy, and well, but what was the vision that they had? That they are not good moral women. Even nowadays, there's a school of geisha. There are geisha schools, but theoretically, they don't perform the first night ceremony. That is when they sell their virginities, and all this thing is theoretically it's not done anymore. But many things.
Fascinating. Well,
girls, I guess.
Thank
I put
you.
some links here in chat. I hope you enjoy. And thank you so much. Thank you for all the questions and for your time.
Thank you, gorgeous. I have saved the links.
Thank you.
Me too. Thank you for your time and for your explanations.
It was beautiful. I really loved it.
I really appreciate it. I have to do this more time. Because I am not used to talk about all this, like about my job and to be on spotlight speaking in English. As a teacher, it's easier to remember the words because I have time. I'm here and I'm listening to it, and then okay, it's this. So, but when I'm like, it's my job, and I'm like, so you see,
I was having a gin tonic, folks.
Oh, nobody told me. Okay,
I was just having tea.
I forgot my wine. I had the wine ready to go.
But we're actually gonna have a happy hour for the group next week. And okay, since we are talking about things, the next Rolê Digital will be in the last Wednesday of March with a singer, and Valentina Maitá. She has her mother is an indigenous woman who went to São Paulo and made her life there, and she is graduated as a singer from USP, and she teaches. Oh my God, I forgot, but I will. I'll send it to you guys later. But she's going. Sorry.
She's an opera singer, isn't she?
She's an opera singer. Yeah.
Wow.
She's graduated by USP, and she teaches singing, and she's not, performing as an artist because of, COVID and everything. But she's going to be here with us next month, and she's going to show how to better our pronunciation in any other language, by working the mechanical parts of speaking. It's very nice.
In English.
Nice.
Well, she is afraid of speaking English because she's not afraid. She's embarrassed, actually. So, which probably going to be in Portuguese.
Okay. And guys, if you've ever done like any singing lessons, do it. It's awesome.
Oh yeah, I want to take singing lessons. I always see you. Yeah. So you're gonna love it, Luanna.
Yeah, thank you. I would think I would join you guys.
Luanna is a caixinha de surpresa. She does many different things.
I do many. I am learning how to play the violin.
Ooh, wow. Nice.
But it's like killing a cat, slowly and painfully. Or something. Kind of like that.
Since we're talking about sexuality, I know that you had a sex shop. Okay, I just said it.
I did many things. So I had my own private sex shop. I had like a little bag. Like a handbag, and I would be around. And personal things. I love
like it. A sex shop Mary Kay. You go
it was just like that, a sex shop Mary Kay. And it would be all very discreet because what did I have to do? I don't know why I've stopped because it was so much fun. I would put clothes on top of the toys and everything. So the husbands and the brothers and the mothers would think, oh, it's just clothes.
Awesome.
And they're like, oh no, they're probably not from my size, so they're like clothes. Okay, let's get to the good stuff.
Luanna.
Amazing.
Guys, thank you.
Thank you for this invitation. For this nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Luanna.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Thank you, guys.